Looks like we're live. Hey, 6 people. Let's get started in a second here. How's the screen size? Does this suck? I'm looking at my own stream on Twitter. I'm sorry, on YouTube. See if it's too small. Oh well, if it is, that's too bad. Squint or something. Alright, this is my first stream. I have no idea what I'm doing here. We'll see if I totally mess things up or not. So let's go. I have a brand new server here, DigitalOcean server. I'm going to log in. I've done nothing on this at all except for change the default password we get. So let's see. I think this will just work. I don't have an SSH key. It's all password. So you can try to brute force that if you want. And I'm only here with the user root. I haven't created any of the users or anything. We're just user root. Nothing is installed at all, and I don't have to do sudo because I'm root, so let's just do apt-get update to update our local repositories of stuff. And I'll cover what some stuff does as they do it. Okay, cool. So apt-get update updates your server's available knowledge of available packages. So it's knowledge of what packages it can install. So you're not actually updating any software. So that stuff is all in the Etsy apt. You can actually check out the, let's see, sources.list file. And you can see what packages or repositories it's pulling from when you do apt-get update, which is kind of interesting. You don't really need to know that, but it's just good to know that this is the area in the server where available packages are pulled from, so the list of available packages. So when you do apt-get update, you're just updating that list, the local cache of the list from those sources. So anyway, we can do apt-get install, and we can install a bunch of stuff with the -y flag here. This is going to just say, don't prompt me, just install it. Don't ask me if I actually want to install it. So the first thing I'm going to do is just install a bunch of utilities. So typical things like git and tmux, vim, curl, wget, zip, unzip, htop, just some utilities that I like to use. Cool, that's done. All right, so what else are we going to install here? So it's a LAMP stack. I'm going to get Nginx, PHP, MySQL, and what am I missing in that 4-letter word? Linux, of course. I already have Linux. I'm on it. So the first thing I'm going to do is add additional repositories so I can get the latest version of software. So I'm going to get the one for Nginx. I'm going to get one for PHP. So that is, I don't need sudo, but I'm going to do add apt repository. And we're going to add some PPA repositories. I'm going to do the -y flag here again so it doesn't prompt me. Add app repository. PPA, I'm going to grab from Ubuntu's PPA sources of repositories, which is a popular place for Ubuntu-specific repositories. And I'm going to grab one for Nginx. I'm actually going to grab the Nginx one called development instead of the one called stable. Development is technically Nginx's mainline branch, as they call it, and it has what they consider it stable because it is basically just the stable branch plus bug fixes. It's not actually a true development branch. So I typically get that because they consider it stable, and I've never had any issues with using that in production. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is add the repository you may not be familiar with, but the one that gets us the latest version of PHP. And that is Andre, I have to spell it right because it's Russian, I think, /PHP. And this will allow us to get the latest version of PHP, which is 7.1 currently. Nope, I didn't do -y, so I get the prompt. Great, okay, so those are added. Now, because I added new repositories, I have to run apt-get update to tell the server to suck in and update its latest cache of available packages. So you can see here it's actually grabbing the Nginx development and Andre PHP repositories, so it'll know I have new packages available. So if I do something like apt cache show, I have to be able to type, and we see this big list of stuff it outputs from apt cache show, which is here. And we can see it's going to give me version 1.11.9. That's the latest available from the Nginx stable, or I'm sorry, Nginx development branch. Whereas if I did not get that PPA, we would end up with something down this list, 1.9 instead of 1.11. So I'm going to get a newer Nginx and a newer PHP that way. So let's just go ahead and get Nginx. Let's see. I'm not paying attention if anyone's even asking me questions or not. Cool, okay. All right, Nginx, we have it. I can do curl localhost, and I'll get that default site, and we can even head to the IP address here and do the same thing. And I get the default Nginx screen, so doing good. We got Nginx, I didn't break anything yet. So I have Nginx. I have the latest development version of Nginx that's built into that repository and that PPA repository, and I can now install PHP. I think we should do PHP next. PHP, of course, is this nice long command of stuff. The important thing to know here is that I'm getting PHP FPM, which is going to let me send web requests from Nginx to PHP. And then CLI, which is going to let me use PHP on the CLI, and then all the modules we may or may not use in our applications, right? So mcrypt, GD, curl, XML, Xdebug, all that good stuff. And I'll be releasing this as a video series sometime soon for the serviceoverhackers.com website, so don't worry about keeping track of this exact command I'm running. Whoops. Okay. Da, 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 hold music, da, da, da. This is the part I get to cut out of videos when I'm actually recording them. But because we're live, you have to sit here and wait with me. All right, PHP is installed. I can do, let's see, ps aux to list out processes. I'm going to search for PHP, and we can see PHP FPM is running. That's great. PHP-v to tell me it's 7.17, also good. Xdebug is currently enabled because they get enabled automatically when you install them. Let's see, let's do Composer next. Let's get in Composer because I'm going to actually install a Laravel application here for us to test with a little bit. This is the one-liner I use to get to get Composer. It doesn't do the MD5 checksum that their official docs have to get it. I sort of just am going to trust that there's no man in the middle attacking me right now, and I'll get the actual installer script. PHP, it's going to do stuff in the command line. It's going to read file, and it's going to get the URL of the Composer installer PHP file. It's going to pipe that to PHP. It's going to use sudo. I'm already root, so I don't need to type in sudo here, but I did anyway, because in case you're not running this as user root. But you need to run this as user PHP because, you need to run this as user root and run that through PHP because We are telling it to use the installation directory user bin, which is owned by user root, and that's really it. That's why. And we're going to call it file name composer instead of composer.far so that I can just use the command composer instead of composer.far. All right, so that's already there. I can do which composer. That is there. Composer version -v. Yeah, -v I guess worked. So it's working. It's there. What do I want to get next? I think I'm going to hold off on doing MySQL for a little bit. Let's just do PHP and Nginx for now. Josh, what do I think about using Postgre over MySQL or MariaDB? Postgre is cool. It's got a lot of nice features. I stick with the devil I know instead of the devil I don't for now. I have used Postgre, but I know MySQL so much better that I just use it because it's easier for me. Postgre does have nice features. Like one thing I like is if you have a really big database and you want to index rows, columns on your database tables that might be really big. Postgre has this nice feature where you can just do a segment of them, like your newest, 100,000 rows, and on a table that has like maybe a few million. And that's kind of a really neat feature. MySQL doesn't have something like that. But, it's all a preference. I don't really care about the stuff that like Postgre is more strict and MySQL sometimes lets less strict stuff through for the same reason I use PHP instead of something, strongly typed. Cool. All right, so I'm going to skip MySQL for now. We have Nginx, we have PHP. We got to get PHP to work. So var/dub HTML is actually the web root, the default web root where we have that Nginx default site. That's this page right here, the index HTML file. So if I do index PHP in here, and I'm going to say just do a PHP info dump. Whoops, semicolon. Okay, so index PHP is in that same web root. Head over here. We're about to see, I think this will just download the page. Yeah, it just downloads it. Garbage. So obviously PHP is not working, right? We have to set that up. So let's see, Etsy, Nginx. In here, we have Nginx, right? We have sites available and sites enabled. So if I list out the stuff in sites enabled, we have a symlink, right? So a symlink of the file default, which is pointing to the file of the same name in sites available. So this is the thing that Debian and Ubuntu servers do commonly. We have all of our possible configurations sitting here in sites available, and they're only enabled when we create a symlink to them inside of sites enabled. I'm sorry, I probably just said that wrong. Sites available is where you have your available configurations. Sites enabled has symlinks to the files that you want enabled, to the configurations you want enabled. You can actually also put real files in the sites enabled directory too if you want, and skip that convention, but I just keep using it. I'm just going to keep using the default file. I'm actually not going to, I'm not going to make a new file or anything. All right, so sites enabled is default, or I could even do sites available. It doesn't matter because it's just a symlink. I'm going to edit it. It's going to let us edit it, and we got a bunch of garbage here. So let's get rid of some of it. I'm not going to do SSL in this video. Yeah, okay, good. That's what I want. And D2D. Gotta remember my Vim bindings. Okay, cool. So basic file here, basic Nginx configuration file here. Obviously, it's not hooked up for PHP, right? It's totally commented out here. Okay, so let's kind of cover this file and we'll just see how far into this video I get. Okay, so this is going to listen on port 80 and it's going to listen on port 80 on the IPv6 network. So I disabled IPv6 on this droplet so I can get rid of this because there's no IPv6 network for Nginx to listen on. It's listening on port 80. It'll be listening on 443 if we wanted to do an SSL certificate as well. But you could use you can do the listen directive here as many times as you want. 443 here, like I said, SSL port. I'm not going to cover SSL, right? But you could do tell it it's an SSL connection. You can tell it's the default server for port 443 if you want. Default server basically says if Nginx doesn't know which configuration to use for a web request, it's going to use this one. So you can only define one default server per port that Nginx is listening on. I only have one configuration. I'll keep this as the default server. And that's it. That's why. Okay, so we're going to set this up for PHP. I'm going to get rid of this. So index is like Apache's default document. I forget what the directive is now, but whatever. If we go to the website and don't define a URI here, right? If we don't say I want index.html, it's going to not know what file to serve. But what it's going to do is try to find these files here, the index files. So it's going to try to find one named index.html or index.html. I'm sorry, or index.htm, or index nginx debian html blah blah blah. We are going to change this to tell it to try to find the index.php file as well, and I'm going to get rid of that default nginx page. So this is just saying if I don't define a URI like I don't here, then find the index.html or index.htm or index.php file. All right, server name, I'm going to leave this blank. There's only one configuration, one Nginx configuration on the server in the file we're in now, so I don't need to segment them by server name, but normally you would, right? So you do like my app.servers4hackers.com, something like that, right? You'd put your host name that you intend to use, and then what Nginx is going to do is try to match that up based on the host header that gets sent in when you make a web request. So if I curl my server and do a header and say the host is going to be my app.servers4hackers.com, I can't type. That's kind of an issue. And I curl whatever my IP address is, I don't remember. Then it would match up against that default. It would match up against that configuration, that Nginx configuration, because it's going to match the host name we send along to the server name here. And that's how you can have multiple configurations on one server for Nginx. They all get segmented by the server name, which depends on the host header we send on an HTTP request. Okay, so we're not really going to see that. I got to move through this because I just have my lunch break early to do this stream. I'm going to go back and revert this to the underscore, the default underscore, because again, this is the only configuration I have on the server, so it doesn't matter to segment it by host name. It's always going to end up on our default server. Okay, location, try files. So the location block here with the backslash is saying match any URI that gets sent to Nginx. If I wanted an exact match, I would do the equal sign here, and I could do, some URI if I wanted something exact, whatever the URI you want to match is. But a backslash without the equal sign is going to match any URI that we send Nginx. So what we're going to do is tell it to find some file on the server that is in the web root. And actually, I think I deleted the web root. I did. That's an accident. I need root. Right now it's var_dub_html. And I am going to keep that this second. I'm going to keep var_dub_html. All right, so try files, right? We're going to send a request to Nginx. It's going to have a URI. The URI may just be a backslash, just the root directory, or it might be something, right? Something else. No matter what it is, it's going to end up in this block right now, and it's going to try it. It's going to try to find a file on a server that matches it. So it's going to start in the web root, and it's going to try to find a file named whatever we give it in the URI. So here it's going to try to find a file or directory named something else. If it doesn't find it as a file, then it's going to attempt to find it as a directory. So just appending a backslash here just means treat it like a directory. If it does not find a file in var_dub_html or does not find a directory in var_dub_html that matches the URI given, then it returns a 404 error. So, of course, everything's relative to var_dub_html. So if I had multiple paths, some deep path, this would look for var_dub_html directory sum, directory deep, directory path, and then, index HTML or HTM or index PHP. And if it doesn't find it, returns a 404. All right, so we need to change this to PHP, and what we do is say, instead of just return a 404, we're going to return index.php because it's going to assume that our application has an index.php file, and then our application can decide if it's a 404 error or if to serve something else. The other nice thing that this does is get rid of the requirement to do index.php in our URIs, right? We don't need to define that in our applications because we have a combination of our index here and this try files thing, which is just going to send the request off to index.php if it doesn't find a file or directory named, whatever we give it up here. All right, so we also need to add $ is args. So $ in the Nginx configuration is a variable. And what we're doing here are setting two. Is args is just going to print a question mark if there's a query string, and args are going to print the query stuff, the arguments, if they exist. So if, you know, like if I do index.php and foo equals bar, this is going to pass that those parameters, those query string parameters, to the index.php file in our code as well. So it adds the question mark, and then it adds foo and equals bar. Is args is the question mark, arguments is the actual arguments themselves. So, okay, location.php, we are going to uncomment this. I have to do it right, and I don't have a snazzy Vim shortcut, so I'm going to do it the annoying slow way. And I'm going to use this one. Okay, so this is going to say if a file that ends up getting served ends in .php, then do the stuff that's in this location block. So if we end up here with the index.php file, or we define some PHP file in our URI, then it's going to end up here. And it does a few things. So it includes snippets, fastcgi php.conf, and this file just sets variables that it sends to PHP FPM, which basically just helps convert a web request into a fastcgi request, which requires, you know, certain variables to be set. All the stuff that gets set in your PHP server variable comes from this kind of stuff. Get that formatting back, and I think I can even, let's open that up real quick. So that'll be etc nginx snippets fastcgi.conf, and this I don't feel like explaining all of this. I'm not going to. I'm sorry. That'll be another video. Too much stuff in there. Okay, the important thing here is that this is going to send our web request converted to fastcgi stuff to PHP FPM. PHP FPM is listening on a Unix socket by default. And because I installed PHP 7.1 and not 7.0, I need to change this because it's going to be that PHP 7.1 fpm.sock. I could set up PHP FPM to listen on a TCP socket, that is, you know, an IP address and port combination, but it's listening on a Unix socket, which is just a file, but a file that gets treated in a way that lets us send and receive information to it. That's a little faster, and it's the default. I'll just keep it that way for now. So var run PHP. Let's see if that directory actually exists. I might not. It does. Okay, good. And that inside of it, we see our PHP 7.1 fpm.sock file. So this will work just fine. And my color disappeared. That's okay. Whatever. It'll be a wait this time. Okay, so this stuff's commented out. I'll just get rid of it so it's less confusing. And we really only need those two lines to send stuff to PHP, which is nice. Okay. I think that'll work. Sorry for all my ums. You're going to have to deal with it. I'm not going to stop. Sudo service PHP FPM. Config test? There's no config test for PHP, so I just got to restart it, or reload it in this case. Actually, I'm sorry. We're doing Nginx, not PHP. So Nginx-T is the exact same as sudo service Nginx config test. Config test is only going to tell you if things are okay or not, while Nginx-T is going to tell you things are okay, but also give you a error message and tell you what the error is that it thinks it is, or where a syntax error is in the configuration file. So it's a little bit nicer. Otherwise, you have to do sudo service Nginx config test and then edit var log Nginx errors, and then you see error in there, which is another step. Nginx-T is just faster, so that's what I use. So that said it was okay, so we can do sudo service Nginx reload to suck in our configuration changes. Let's head back over here, and should, without setting a URI here, get the default PHP page. Oop, I have a backslash error. Doesn't like that. It's slow for some reason. I don't know why. There we go. But we have our default PHP page. Good. Beautiful. So PHP is working. That is good. That is beautiful. Let's move on to our next thing. I'm looking at my list on the other screen here. Let's make a Laravel application. So var dub, I'm gonna make it in here. Everything in here is owned by user root, and I'm currently user root, so I'm just gonna go ahead and without sudo, I'm gonna do composer create project Laravel. I'm gonna pull in 5.5 just because I want to, and I'm gonna create this in a directory named my app inside of our var dub directory. So this will run and we'll have a PHP app at the end of it, and then we can look into why we're gonna see the wait screen of death because of some permission issues. I do want to get rid of existing VCS. Okay, cool. So I have an application here. I have to edit etc nginx sites available default because our web root is now var dub, and not just that, it's var dub my app, and inside of my app, it's actually the public directory. So if I go to my app and public and I do print working directory, I get our web root. It's going to be that. So now we can vim, well, file work, whatever, etc nginx sites available default, and we can replace the root directive here. All right, so var dub my app public, that'll be the correct web root. I can do nginx-t, it says that's good, sudo service nginx reload to get that configuration in, and I'll refresh, and we'll get not the wait screen of death, but an actual error, which is interesting. That's an improvement over the usual. I really expected the wait screen of death there. That's interesting. I wonder if that's an improvement that's recent in Laravel 5.5. Because typically if you can't write to the log file, then you just never see an error because it doesn't get as far as showing you an error screen. So that's cool. I think that's an improvement in Laravel 5.5, which I very much like. And that also means we have debug on, which I think is a default for installing Laravel. It is. It's true. Okay, so that's okay. You can see errors for now. I don't have any permissions or stuff in the environment variables or anything. Okay, so streamer file var dub my app storage log Laravel log could not be opened, failed to open stream, permission denied. So we know exactly what's happening here. If I do psaux, I'm going to grep out and search for PHP. PHP FPM, which is running our web request, which is running PHP, is owned by user and root dub data, right? So these processes of PHP are running as user dub data, but our files in here are all owned by user root. And on top of that, and on top of the files and directories here being owned by user root and group root, stuff like the permissions don't let anyone else write to it, right? So let's see our storage directory. The user root can read, write, and execute to the directory storage. The group root and anyone else can read and execute, but they cannot write, right? So Laravel running as user dub data cannot write to the storage directory because it does not have permissions to. So I could just do the chmod 0777 garbage, but that is complete garbage and don't ever do that. So let's do instead, we're going to change ownership to dub data. And a little trick you can do is to change the group at the same command by just adding a semicolon here. And let's see, I'm going to do recursive. And I'm going to say change that on the storage directory and actually also on the bootstrap directory, because Laravel has to write to both those locations. Okay, so I'll list this out again. Storage and all this stuff inside of storage is owned by user and group dub data, so that user can write to it. And the same for the bootstrap directory. And because PHP is running as user and group dub data, we'll see that we get our Laravel response here now because I was able to write to all the places in the file system that it needed to. I guess I should say this instead of just type it, but Michael, if I do serious on this, it's going to be simpler than that. I'm not going to install everything. I might install Redis and MySQL. I'll probably skip Postgre and Beanstalk, and I might do Supervisor, CTL. I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe not. Probably not, actually. Okay, so we have our Laravel app up and running. We installed Nginx, we installed PHP, we got Nginx configured to use PHP. PHP is still running its user group data, so we had that permissions thing. So this is annoying because when we deploy our application, we're going to deploy it as some user, and then we're probably going to have a deploy step that says to change these directories to data after the fact. Which is okay, but it's annoying, and a lot of people don't really understand permissions at the level they should to know how to get rid of this and get through this error. So what Forge does is to run PHP as user Forge and then make your web files, your application files, also owned by user Forge, so they always match up. The permissions always match up that way. And it's a little easier to deploy and to log into your site and to edit files without having to worry about permissions, which are kind of always a sticky point. So let's see, do I want to get into that? I think I do. Yeah, let's do that. I'm going to skip some of the other stuff I have in my notes here and just get to the fun part here. Okay, so let's go to my home directory for no other reason than I just want to get rid of some cruft in my terminal. I'm going to do add user. I'm going to name a user Forge. I might as well stick with Forge if I'm going to make a server that's Forge-ish like. So I'm going to add the user Forge. I'm going to give this guy a password. Skip all this stuff. You don't ever have to put the info in. It doesn't matter. So now in the home directory, there will be a directory Forge for the user we just created. If we cat out etc password, we'll see Forge exists here as user ID 1000, group ID 1000 as a home directory of home Forge, which we just saw. And when you log in, it uses bin bash. So we're able to log into the user Forge and it'll start a shell in bash, much like we are with user root right now. Okay, so what do I want to do here? Let's go back to var-dub-dub, and I'm going to move my app into my home directory and into the Forge directory. So I'm going to put this application under user's Forge home directory. Head to Forge, and we're going to do chown-r, and so let's change ownership, right? And do recursive with the -R. I'm going to say set it to user and group Forge, and I'm going to do that to the directory named my app. Okay, so this is now going to be our new web root from Nginx. So I can edit etc Nginx sites available default, and we'll get the new web root for the new location where our application now lives, which, like I just said, is inside of the user Forge's home directory. Okay, so now all the files inside of home Forge my app public are owned by user Forge, and that's probably not an issue for Nginx, right? So Nginx, just like PHP, is also running as user data. So if it needs to read a file on the disk drive in that directory, it needs permission to. So if I am user data, nah. Well, let's just see what happens. Inside of the public directory, we have some static files already, so that's good. Let's do sudo nginx-t. It likes our configuration, so we can do sudo service nginx reload. And good. Good. Okay, great. Permission errors still make sense because we still once again have a permission mismatch, right? PHP is still running as data. Nginx is also running as data. But our files are in the Forge user's home directory, and they're all owned by user Forge. So once again, we have that same issue of permissions. Let's see what happens if we try to grab a file that is not PHP, like robots.txt. All right, it's able to get that. So it can read static files. It's really just PHP that's the issue. So that's fine. And what that means explicitly or implicitly or whatever is that even though this file is owned by user and group Forge, group and other, specifically other is what is important here, can still read the file. So Nginx, which is running as user data, is able to read the static file robots.txt still because the permissions here allow it. Okay, but that's just Nginx. We are worried about PHP. PHP is where the error is. Good. Okay. So instead of changing files to get owned by data here, I'm going to change PHP to change what user PHP is run as. So we can head to etc PHP. PHP will have a bunch of directories in here. It depends what version is installed. I have 7.1. We're going to go to FPM. Inside of here, we have a few files to edit. Well, a few files we can edit. We're just going to edit one inside of pool.d, and we're going to edit www.conf. So if I do ps.aux, and I'm going to search for PHP again, PHP FPM is running under the resource pool named www, and that is configured here in this file. So this file determines how PHP FPM runs and how it manages processes, like how many processes it spins up to handle requests. We can see it's named www because of this in the brackets here. This is explicitly what's naming it www. The file name doesn't actually matter. And if we head down to the listen directive, we can see it's listening on that Unix socket that we set in Nginx. And up here, it's running PHP as user www data and group www data. So let's change that. And look at the space, stay consistent. Okay, so this is going to tell PHP to run as user and group forge. So I can do sudo service php 7.1 fpm restart or reload. I'm going to reload. I think that'll do it. And we can do ps.aux again. We're going to grep and search for the process named PHP. And this time it's running as user and group forge, the two PHP FPM processes. So the permissions should line up here, and they are. So beautiful. PHP is running as user and group forge. Our code is all owned by user and group forge, and so the permissions line up. So if I logged into this server as user forge or deployed my code as user forge, I wouldn't really have an issue because the files would all stay owned by user and group forge, and PHP would never have an issue writing to the resources or the storage or the bootstrap directories and the files inside of that because the permissions all line up. Josh, sorry, I can't. But the video is going to be live to watch later after the fact. Okay, so what else matters here? Let me look at my notes. We made it forge-like. We changed the user and group. Oh, yeah, let's cover that. Okay, so user forge cannot do sudo stuff, right? So if I do sudo service nginx status, my password for forge is this, I think. Yeah, it is. Okay. Forge is not in the sudoers file. This incident reported, which is funny. It's not, but whatever. But user forge doesn't have the ability to use sudo, and I don't want it to. Now in forge you do, and it's fine that you do, but you have to put in your password. Okay, I'm gonna do that actually. So I'm going to user mod. I'm gonna user mod. Modify the user. I'm going to append with the a group named sudo to the user forge. And let's see, I'll do groups forge to make sure that worked. So forge, user forge is part of group forge, but also group sudo. And by convention, this is going to let user forge do stuff with the sudo command. It's going to let it use the sudo command. So I can do sudo service nginx status. It doesn't matter what I do here. I just need to make sure I can use the sudo command here. And it works, I think. It does work. Great. So user forge can now run sudo. But if I deploy, I want to do things like sudo service php 7.1 fpm reload, right? So this is a common thing to do after the deploy, is to reload your PHP FPM. It's going to ask me for my password though. So if I automate this, whoops, God, I keep doing that. Okay, so if I automate this step, all right, so it's cached the fact that I put my password in, and that I don't have to put my password in for a number of seconds, which is something configured. But you saw me, I had to put the password in the first time, and if I do automated deployments, I'm going to have to put in my password every time I reload PHP FPM. And of course, that's not really going to work for us because it's automated, right? There's no way for us to get that prompt to put in our password whenever we deploy our code. So what we want is to set it up so user forge can run this command without having to put in a password, but we don't want to open it up so user forge can run any sudo command without having a password, because that's, less secure. So the way to do that is to use vsudo, and if I do sudo vsudo here, it's going to edit the sudoers file, and the sudoers file is controlling who and how can use the sudo command. So people inside of group admin and group sudo can do any command with sudo. So that's kind of nice for them. In addition to that, I'm not going to make any changes to this file. In addition to that, does the etc sudoers.d directory, and if I'm user root, I can read that. And any file in here is going to get read in and be part of that configuration. So if let's see, visudo, I'm going to say the file to edit this time is etc sudoers.d. I can't type. And it's going to be this 90 cloud init users thing. And what that does is just say that user root can do sudo with no password, I guess. That's what it's saying there. That's something specific to, what cloud am I on? To DigitalOcean's server here. Okay, so what we want to do is set up the same thing for Forge, user Forge. So I'm going to make a new file in here. So I'm going to do visudo. You always should edit your sudoers files with this visudo command, because if you have a bad syntax error, it's not going to let you save those changes. If you do save changes to this file with a bad syntax error, you're going to really mess up your server. You won't be able to run sudo commands, and you're basically dead in the water there then. So I'm going to do visudo-f, I'm going to do etc sudoers.d, and inside of that directory, I'm going to make a new file called php-fpm. It doesn't matter what you name the file, it just has to be any file in here. And I'm going to insert this. So let's change this. It's not user my app. We created user Forge. User Forge, when logged in from any host, is going to be able to run any, I'm sorry, I have the syntax here a little bit wrong, or my explanation of it is wrong. This is going to affect user Forge. User Forge is going to be able to say, or to use sudo with, no, I think I'm right. I think Forge here, I think this is saying that Forge can log in from any host and run sudo commands with no password, but only the following command. Service PHP 7.1 fpm reload. So this is going to say user Forge from any host can run the following commands without using sudo without having to put in a password. And that's the sudo service PHP 7.1 fpm reload command. So the user can only reload without having to put in a password. Let's test it out. I'm going to go on over to user Forge again and do sudo service nginx status. All right, fine. You're just going to keep being weird with me. Okay, so let's see if this cleared that cache. Sudo service nginx status. Hey, it asked me for my password. Thanks, good. I'm going to put in the wrong password there and just get out of it. Okay, so I did sudo service nginx status. It asked me for my password, like I would expect it to. I'm going to do sudo service php 7 fpm restart. It's going to ask me for my password. Okay, so we can't do that when we're automating stuff because we have a password prompt. But if I do reload, it's just going to work, right? So I did sudo. I didn't get a password. So user Forge can now run this command while it's automated during an automated deployment without getting the password prompt. And we locked it down to just this one specific command, which isn't particularly harmful. So that is a good way to set up Forge to be able to deploy easily. In fact, Forge does set that up for you. But since we're mimicking Forge here, I had to redo that for us. Good. So what do we cover? All right, we installed Nginx, we installed PHP, we configured Nginx to work with PHP. We saw we had permission issues, and then we changed the location of our application into the user Forge's home directory. Of course, we created user Forge to do that. And then we changed PHP to run as user Forge. Right, so it's running as user Forge, so we don't have permission issues anymore. And user Forge in the home directory has the application inside of it, just like you do on a Forge server. And user Forge can do whatever it needs to here. I don't have a Git repo, but when we deploy here, user Forge can do a git pull, and it can do sudo service PHP 7.1 fpm reload after you pull in the latest code. So if you have something like opcache enabled, it'll clear out the opcache cache, so you actually get your new code being served. All right, so what's my time? 44. I have 10-15 more minutes or so. Oh, Florian, I sort of just said it. I guess I did just say it kind of quick. If you have opcache enabled, that caches your PHP code. You have to do a PHP FPM reload to clear that cache. Otherwise, you're going to be serving your old pages, your old content, right? And that you don't want that because you just deployed new code. You don't always have to otherwise. But I still like to, I think some PHP processes might actually hang on to old code until PHP FPM creates a new process to serve another request. And sometimes those processes stay up and running and serve a few requests before they die. I'm not 100% sure about that. I think that might be the way it works. So it's just something I like to do. What else? Let's cover MySQL real quick. I'm not going to do Redis because Redis is super simple. You just install Redis and then you point your configuration to it and it's done. But let's do sudo apt-get install -y. So I'm not going to do a repository to get the latest stable MySQL server. MySQL does provide one, but I typically just skip it. Ubuntu's is a decently new version of 5.7. But, you know, you can get a repository and look up how to do that if you want. I might even have a video on it, but I sort of forget. Okay, I didn't show you, obviously, installing MySQL Server without getting prompts, but it's possible. But I have videos on that serviceforhackers.com if you want to check it out. I'm just going to create a new root user here with password root, which is extremely not secure, but I'm just going to get rid of the server afterwards, so I don't care. And we get to sit here and watch it install MySQL. Whee! So what I'm going to show you here is just installing MySQL and then creating a database and a user, and a few things related to that. Okay, so MySQL is up and running, sudo service, MySQL status, you're up and running, great. So next thing I like to do is a command called MySQL secure installation. Good, I'm glad tab auto-completed that. Okay, so root has the password. Do I want to change the password for root? I don't. Oh, would you like to set up validate password plugin? I don't typically do that. You can do that if you want. You can read about it because I don't know the specifics of how it does that. I think it might disable your password after X days or make you create a new one. I think the passwords expire and then it might set up the requirement for secure passwords as well. I'm not sure. I'm also not going to change the root password. I am going to remove anonymous users. I am going to disallow root to log in remotely. I'm going to have it remove test databases, and let's reload privileges since it just changed privileges. Okay, so I can log into MySQL. And are you kidding me? Did I just break MySQL? I didn't. I had the wrong password. Whew. Okay. So show databases. It got rid of the test database. If I select user and host from MySQL.users, yeah, it shows these are the only users and the host they can connect from. So user root at localhost and these users, which apparently exist. Cool. Okay, so let's create a new database. Create database my app. So it's going to be named my app, and I'm going to set a default character set of UTF-8 MB4. Of course, I have to spell that right. So this is a good default character set to use. It's a complete or a more complete implementation of the UTF-8 character set than just saying UTF-8. UTF-8 MB4 lets you do things like have emoji in your database, which of course is extremely important. So we have a database named my app, and then we're going to create a user to connect to this database. So let's do create user my user at localhost. Users in MySQL are based on the username, of course, but also the host name, and the host name defines where a user can connect from. So I'm saying here, create the user my user that can only connect from localhost. Identified by some password, which is super secret. I'm just going to say secret, which of course is a terrible password. I'm doing it anyway. I'm going to destroy the server in a few minutes. All right, so we have a database, we have a user. I need that user to be able to do stuff to that database. So I'm going to grant all privileges. I don't actually typically lock down the privileges that the user can do in this one database. People do. It's a good idea, maybe, I guess. I'm not going to bother here. I'm going to grant all privileges on the database my app and on every table inside of that database to the user we just created, my user at localhost. And remember, users are not just the username, but the host. So I have to say what host also, right? So a user is actually defined by the user and the host, not just the username. So I can't just say my user here. I have to say user at localhost or at some host. I'll flush privileges because we just changed privileges, and it caches them in memory, and flushing it gets more privileges, and we can test it out. let's see, is my user. My password was secret, and I'm in, and the databases, the only databases I can see are my app, and of course every user can see information schema. So that's looking pretty good. Let's go to my app. I'm in my app, so let's edit.env, and DB connection is not 127.0.0.1, it's localhost. And the database name was my app, I think, and the user was my user, and the password is indeed secret. And let's test this out by doing creating the authentication scaffolding, and then we'll say migrate. And oh, I have a typo. I do indeed have a typo. Okay, let's migrate. All right, access to the database, perfect. So head back over here. I should have this stuff, and I can log in, I can register, all that good stuff. Cool. Most important thing here is I have access to the database. Let's cover one last thing about MySQL here. If I don't define a host here, right? If I don't say 127.0.0.1 or some host here, then it's going to assume localhost. So I can do my user -p and put in the password, and I'm in. This user is not going to have permission to connect over this, right? Localhost in MySQL, specific to MySQL, localhost is not equivalent to 127.0.0.1. Ah, I lied. Oh, how dare you do that to me? I can't believe I just got lied to like that. My whole life is a lie. Secret. No, I want root. Let's see why I'm lying to everyone right now. User host from MySQL.users. So my understanding is that when you log into MySQL over 127.0.0.1, you're logging in over the TCP network. But when you're connecting, what did I do differently before? Nope, hang on, bad password. I don't know what the hell was going on before. I made a mistake. Whatever. This is proving my point. I'm right. That's all that matters. Good. All right, so MySQL here is connecting over localhost. Connections work. Oh, did I just mess up everything? I'm an idiot. I'm losing control here. Good. Okay. So this means I'm still wrong. I still have an incorrect understanding of what I'm doing here. Okay, whatever, fine. So if we do etc MySQL, there's a bunch of comp files in here. Let's do MySQL conf.d. And we head to MySQL.conf. I'll tell you about the point I was trying to make. Apparently my understanding is totally not perfect, but whatever. MySQL is listening on two places. It's listening on a socket here, right? var run, So when you connect to MySQL over localhost, it's actually connecting on the socket, on the Unix socket. But when I connect over 127.0.0.1, it's listening on a TCP network. It's listening on the network 127.0.0.1, that loopback localhost network. So if I comment this out and do not bind an address, actually, let's do it this way. I'm going to bind this to our local private network instead of our loopback network. So I'm going to bind address to that. So this is no longer going to be listening on the localhost loopback 127.0.0.1 network. Whoa, of course. Sudo vim .conf bind address. Okay, so I'm no longer listening on the localhost TCP network. It is going to continue to listen on the localhost Unix socket file. So let's restart that. This is really the point I'm trying to make. Never mind the user stuff. So if I try to connect over this, and I'll even do user root here just to show you it's not user specific. I can't connect. It's not listening on that, right? But I can do the private network now because it's listening on the private network IP address. right? So I'm, oh, okay. User root's not allowed to connect from this host name. So even more. I have videos on this. I didn't plan on getting into this, so I'm not really prepared, right? Obviously. If I don't do a host here, right, it's going to connect over localhost, that Unix socket, and this will work. Great. So create user roots at this IP address, identified by password root. Now I can exit, and now I should be able to do this. I can. Okay. So, right, so I can connect to this network now too. The only thing I can't connect to, the only thing I can't use to connect to right now is this, right? Because MySQL is no longer listening on the TCP network 127.0.0.1. Now, last thing, because I'm out of time. Bad password. Okay. I think I was able to log in as user my app using localhost and using 127.0.0.1 just because that's based on host name resolution, DNS resolution. So localhost obviously resolves to 127.0.0.1 and vice versa. So that's probably why that worked. I'm going to go with that. Sure. All right, let's see what people have typed to me. Probably a lot of explanation of things I'm missing. Yeah, okay, so exactly what you said, Florian. I think so too, just based on this testing. So I didn't have a perfect understanding, but it's a little better now. Okay, so that is going to conclude this hour or so of streaming. Thanks for hanging in with me, with you guys who hung in. I hope to do this a bunch more in the future, and hopefully you guys learned some stuff. See you later.